Hello, welcome back to the Fortrea podcast series on radiopharmaceutical development. I'm Hector Herrero, and today we are continuing our exploration of what truly differentiates radiopharmaceutical clinical trials from more traditional oncology studies. At Fortrea, we have spent many years supporting radiopharmaceutical programs across different phases and geographies. One thing has become very clear: site selection is one of the most underestimated and the most critical success factors in these studies. Radiopharma studies look familiar on the surface, but operationally, they behave differently. Infrastructure, workflows, regulatory readiness, and timing all play a much bigger role, and mistakes at this stage can be very hard to recover from. We are here talking not only about site capability to handle radiopharmaceuticals, having a license for the specific radioisotope, or having been trained on the study specifics or calibrating their instruments. There is something much specific and important: the ability of the investigational site as a whole, and this is really the important piece, as a whole, to work in that environment, including patient and drug journeys perspective. To explore this from the clinical perspective, I'm joined today by Dr. Cristina Matsushita and Dr. Paulo Nunes, oncologist and senior medical director at Fortrea, with extensive hands-on experience conducting radiopharmaceutical clinical trials. Thank you both for joining.
Thanks, Hector. Hello, everyone.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Cristina Matsushita. I'm a nuclear medicine physician in Porto Alegre, Brazil. And I work with a radiopharmaceutical company called R2 Pharma.
From an operational standpoint, radiopharmaceutical trials introduce constraints that don't exist in conventional oncology, especially around timing and coordinator. Dr. Matsushita, based on your experience as an investigator working in radiopharma trials, why is site selection particularly challenging in this space?
Well, site selection in radiopharmaceutical trials is particularly challenging because we are not simply evaluating the experience of an investigator or an oncology department. We are evaluating the readiness of an entire multidisciplinary ecosystem. Unlike conventional oncology trials, radiopharmaceutical studies operate under strict time constraints driven by isotope production, radioactive decay, imaging windows, and patient scheduling. A delay in one step can impact the entire treatment pathway. When assessing a potential site, I look beyond clinical expertise and I need to understand whether oncology, nuclear medicine, pharmacy, imaging, radiation safety, nursing, and research teams can work together as a coordinated unit. The site must have the appropriate license, trained personnel, validated workflows, and the ability to manage both patients and radioactivity materials safely and efficiently. Ultimately, successful site selection in radiopharma is about identifying sites that can function as an integrated system under real-world operational conditions, not simply sites with strong oncology credentials.
Yeah, thank you. That aligns very closely with what we see at Fortrea during feasibility assessments. Timelines are also compressed, and small gaps can have a major downstream impact. Paulo, how does that pressure show up clinically once a trial is underway?
That pressure becomes apparent very quickly once a radiopharmaceutical trial is underway. In this space, the margin for delay is extremely small. If imaging, radiotracer delivery, or patient preparation slips even slightly, you're often not dealing with a simple reschedule. You may lose the treatment window or the patient altogether. So, from a medical oversight perspective, this pressure concentrates in three areas. First, patient eligibility and more importantly, the readiness. So those trials usually target patients in a narrow clinical window with strict alignment of labs, imaging, and prior therapies. any breakdown in the coordination can render a patient ineligible before dosing ever happens. Second, safety and execution. So radiopharmaceutical trials depends on a seamless integration between oncology, nuclear medicine, pharmacy, radiation safety, and imaging. If that integration is not already mature at the site, the problems surface immediately as dosing delays, protocol deviations, or radiation handling concerns, which are difficult to fix once the trial is already live. And then third, but not last, data integrity. Imaging and timing are not operational details here. They are fundamental to endpoints. So any variability on that end directly impacts the science behind and created by the trial. So this is where the risking by Fortrea's is experience makes a real difference. We treat radiopharma site selection as part of the clinical risk management, validating workflows, timelines, and cross-functional readiness upfront. So from the even during the feasibility and site selection process, that approach helps sponsors protect patients, data quality, and development timelines.
Absolutely. So, as we have mentioned, selecting the right size is extremely critical always, but even more when we are talking about radiopharmaceutical clinical trials. At Fortrea, we often describe this as an orchestration. Its function doesn't need to be good in isolation. It needs to be ready at exactly the right moment, alongside every other function. That's why the site selection is so critical. You can have an excellent clinicians, a strong oncology experience, motivated team, but if the workflows, that patient journey, that drug journey, is not flowing properly, if the workflows have not been rehearsed, if responsibilities aren't clearly defined, or if the infrastructure and licenses are fully aligned, that 5 minutes rule closes very quickly. This is also why radiopharmacy exposes operational weakness earlier than many other trial types. There's a very little room for improvisation, and reactive fixes rarely work once a study is live. The 5 minutes rule is something that we implement during the site selection of the sites, where we ensure that site staff meet at least within 5 minutes. We don't need more. In order to see if the study really is doable at the site, sitting all together in the room, talking each other, and they will, of course, be able to realize if the clinical trial, the environment behind a clinical trial is really doable for that radiopharmaceutical setting. Dr. Matushita, from your experience and your perspective as an investigator, how does this level of synchronization change the way clinical teams approach trial execution?
It changed the approach completely. In radiopharmaceutical trials, success depends on multiple teams performing different tasks and at exactly the right time. Unlike many conventional studies, there is very little room for delays or improvisation. Clinical teams must think beyond their individual responsibilities and understand the entire patient and product journey. Investigators need to collaborate closely with pharmacy, nuclear medicine, imaging, radiation safety, nursing, and research coordinators to ensure every step is aligned. I often describe radiopharmaceutical trials as an orchestra. Each department may be highly competent individually, but the study only succeeds if everyone performs together and according to the same schedule. Early multidisciplinary discussions are essential because they help identify operational challenges before the first patient is enrolled. The sites that performs best are those where communication is proactive, responsibilities are clearly defined, and workflows are rehearsed before the study begins.
Thanks a lot for that response. So, yeah, now I think it would be good if we can move to infrastructure, because this is also where assumptions often break down. Many oncology sites believe they are ready for radiopharma because they have a strong clinical experience or access to nuclear medicine. But in practice, that's rarely sufficient. Paulo, from your experience in radiopharmaceutical studies, what infrastructure is truly essential for sites to operate safely and reliably?
Thanks, Hector. That's a great question. Uh, the first essential element is end-to-end workflow integration. So, oncology, nuclear medicine, pharmacy, imaging, radiation safety, and waste handling cannot work in silos. And these functions must operate as one coordinated, time locked system. If hands off or responsibilities are unclear, delays and safety risks appear immediately. Second, radiopharmaceutical specifically handling capability is critical. Therapeutic radiopharma is fundamentally different from diagnostic nuclear medicine. Sites need appropriate hot labs, shielding, validation preparation processes, and staff trained especially in clinical trial handling and documentation. Diagnostic expertise alone is not sufficient. Third, the imaging infrastructure and standardization are central. So, imaging procedures, either as regular CT scans or PET scans, or is often part of the intervention and the endpoint, not only a support function. So, we need to focus on equipment calibration, protocol specific acquisition guidelines, and strict timing adherence that are all essential for the proper execution of the study. When we have variability in those aspects, there is a direct compromise on the trial results. Fourth, radiation safety readiness must be proactive. Radiation safety teams need to be involved from trial planning with clear procedures for staff exposure, patient management, and radioactive waste, aligned with both local regulation and protocol demands. Finally, human infrastructure matters as much as physical assets. Radiopharma trials require stable, cross-trained teams with redundancy. Reliance on a single expert creates many risks, and we've seen that already happen in studies, and we've compromised the trial outcomes and leading for us to be extremely proactive in terms of site management. So anyone running radiopharmaceutical trials need to assess whether the entire system is trial ready, mapping workflows, stress testing timelines, and identifying gaps upfront. That rigor is what protects patients, data integrity, and development timelines in this kind of trials.
Thank you, Paulo. So, from the CRO side, we often see gaps, not in intent, but in licensing, isotope authorization, waste handling pathways, also on how to organize all the workflow between the different teams. Dr. Matoshita, where do you most commonly see a disconnect between what sites think they have and what radiopharma trials actually require?
Well, one of the most common disconnects is the assumption that having a nuclear medicine department automatically means being ready to participate in a radiopharmaceutical clinical trial. In Brazil, radiopharmaceutical regulation has evolved significantly over the last 2 decades. Historically, the sector was centered around a limited number of radioisotopes and a small number of approved radiopharmaceuticals. More recently, we have seen a rapid expansion of PET tracers, theranostic agents, and investigational radiopharmaceuticals, accompanied by increasingly complex requirements from both regulatory and radiation protection authorities. As a result, many sites have experience with routine nuclear medicine procedures but may not be fully prepared for the specific regulatory requirements associated with a clinical trial. A site may possess a valid nuclear medicine license, for example, but not be authorized for the particular radioisotope being investigated. Similarly, the institution may have established radiation safety procedures but lack specific workflows for investigational product, radioactive waste generated by a clinical protocol, or trial-specific documentation requirements. Another important challenge in Brazil is the radiopharmaceutical oversight often involves multiple stakeholders, including Anvisa, SENEM, institutional radiation safety committees, pharmacy departments, and hospital administration. A site may believe it is ready for a clinical perspective, but approvals from one of these groups can become a critical bottleneck. I also frequently see gaps related to infrastructure and operational readiness. Sites may have excellent imaging equipment and experienced professionals, but lack protocol specific calibration procedures, dedicated research personnel, or sufficient coordination between oncology, nuclear medicine, pharmacy, and radiation safety teams. Ultimately, radiopharmaceutical trials readiness is not determined by whether a site performs nuclear medicine. It is determined by whether the entire institution can safely and compliantly support the specific radiopharmaceutical protocols and patient journey required by the study. That distinction is often where the biggest surprises emerge during feasibility assessments.
Before we continue, this is a good moment to pause and close the first part of our discussion. So far, we have established why radiopharmaceutical site selection cannot be approached like a standard oncology feasibility exercise. The key message is clear: timing, patient readiness, cross-functional coordination, and workflow maturity must all be assessed early, because once the study is live, even small gaps can have significant clinical and operational consequences. Thank you.